Hi, friend. Ashley here. Welcome to the Unlock Your Dream podcast. I'm here to guide you along your journey to unlocking your dreams to achieve the best life that you can imagine possible. From my journey in medicine as a PA and then some in the corporate world, I always still desired a little bit more out of life. It wasn't until I met some people who had seen their dreams realized that it occurred to me that maybe, just maybe, mine could come true too. Come along with me as we get to know some of these friends of mine and hear their stories of unlocking their dreams. Hey, friend, welcome back this week to the Unlock Your Dream podcast. This week we have a dear friend of mine. It feels like we've spent a lot of time together in the car, many hours with her in my earbuds. But Stephanie King, I got to know her thankfully through a friend who was sending me some positive birth stories when I got pregnant last year. And she heads up my essential birth course and the podcast, Pregnancy and Birth Made Easy, which we can talk more about obviously through this today. But I highly recommend if you're thinking about getting pregnant, are pregnant, want to support friends that are pregnant, I cannot just recommend that enough. So Stephanie is a mama to 3 boys and 2 girls, all born very differently. She's a professional childbirth educator, a doula, obviously the host, like I said, of the Pregnancy and Birth Made Easy podcast, and has created an online course, which my husband and I took when I got pregnant. And she also has a postpartum course now. She's really passionate about empowering women through knowledge to trust in their bodies and really just the process of birth. And then just for fun, when she's not doing birth work, you can find her homeschooling, serving in her church, and indulging in great food and company and spending time in the sun with her kids. So welcome, Stephanie, to the Unlock Your Dream podcast. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm excited to be here with you today.
Awesome. So just to kind of dive in, I want to send everyone over to your podcast, obviously to learn everything birth, but just to dive in a little bit more with you today. Any part of your story that you want to share about how you even got into birth education, how you became a doula, anything about your story that you want to share?
Sure. I will briefly, because otherwise it'll take the whole hour, right? Diving into all of my birth stories and stuff. But I'll tell you a little bit about my background and my births, and what made me have that drive to make a change or to at least empower other women to believe that they could, should they choose to do birth any way that they desire. So my first baby, pregnant, not a big deal, but I am short. I am 5 foot, and I don't know what it was about that, but my first provider, and it should have been a big red flag. I know that now, right? But I remember meeting with him and saying, I really have a desire to go unmedicated. We took all the hospital classes. I felt somewhat prepared in my mind. And he was like, well, women with size 5 foot, 5.5 shoe and less tend to have cesarean births. And I remember at the time thinking, what? But I was like, okay, like where, like, why, what are we talking about? And then I had said early on, I want to go unmedicated. And he goes, well, we don't have that conversation until 37 weeks. And I'm like, okay, another red flag, right? I was like, okay. And because of course, first time mom at 37 weeks, if she's not getting the answer she wants, she's not going to switch providers, likely, right? If she doesn't know any better. And that's exactly what happened. So at 37 weeks, even though I told him I wanted to go unmedicated, he gave me all the things that he loves to do. And he's like, there's no reason to be in pain. And I give you epidurals. I give my patients their epidurals early. And I'm like, do you remember that we had this conversation? Like, I feel like we're not connecting at all, right? So of course, that birth did not go as I would like. I was probably about 35, 34 weeks when I was reading some birth stories online. It was actually a book on Amazon, and I was reading this birth story, and I'm very pregnant and I'm at work, so I'm bawling, right? And I'm like, that is what I want my birth to be like. And it was this beautiful, natural, unmedicated birth story. And so I had actually reached out to some local birth educators, and everyone was like, you're so close, or I don't have space. There was one lady, she's like, I'll do it, but it'll be this many hours on a Saturday. It's kind of like a crash course, and I'm going to have to charge you this much, which was more than what she normally charges and much more than we had. We were newlyweds and very broke, even though we both worked. And so I was like, that's not going to work. I'm just going to have to wing it, and it'll be great. And it was not great. So I had that provider that I had. My water broke in the middle of the night, but it was like just a trickle. And so I didn't really know if it was amniotic fluid or not. I was having contractions, but I couldn't tell unless I was stopped and feeling my stomach, So I really was not in active labor. And so of course they're like, well, come straight to the hospital. I didn't know any better. So I went and they tested it. It's amniotic fluid. The words were, your provider says you need to be on Pitocin. And I asked her specifically, did he say need? And she goes, let me double check. She came back. He says need. And I was like, okay, well, if I need to be on Pitocin, let's do it. And so many hours later, unmedicated, but with Pitocin, they couldn't crank the Pitocin up high enough to make the contractions strong enough to dilate my cervix and all of that, because my baby's heart rate kept dropping. So he was having an issue with it. I wasn't dilating. 36 hours later, I had a cesarean birth, all of which I believe was extremely unnecessary. So knowing what I know today, that birth would have been very different. However, because of that experience, I was like, next time's going to be different, and I'm going to get all kinds of educated. I'm going to take the birth classes. I'm going to do everything I need. So we did. We fast forward to the next birth. We were overseas in Germany. So Germany is more naturally minded. A lot of Europe in general, but specifically in Germany, they have, because we were military family at the time, you had to meet with an OB, but the midwives were who you birthed with. I didn't meet any other midwives until I was in labor, but they were wonderful, and they were very how can we help you? And we're here for you and all of that. However, same thing. Even though my husband and I, at this point, we had taken a birth course, we had practiced some things together. I have prodromal labor, so there was some of that involved. But when I started having pushing contractions at 4 centimeters, because my body was exhausted and likely because of a positioning thing, which again, now I know, the midwife had said, I have something that can take the edge off. I can take that, come over and see me. And so I got my little pain shot in the booty, and I'm like, okay, if I just get that, I can still, go unmedicated and finish this out. And I went and laid down, my water broke. And of course, I didn't get any kind of relief, because once your water breaks, it's a little more intense. And so I ended up getting an epidural shortly after that, and remember thinking it's going to just cascade again. I have no control over this, and all those thoughts, but that's not what happened. Luckily, I had an epidural. They added that Pitocin in. Baby did fine. I did fine. And I birthed that baby vaginally. So that was my VBAC. And then we moved from Europe. I was actually pregnant in Germany, and we were moving back to the States. And we were moving to North Dakota. And in North Dakota, where we were located, there was one hospital nearby. And I called before, and I was like, hi, whatever. And I'm looking for a VBAC. They didn't care about any of that. They're like, we don't care that you've had a VBAC before. We don't do that here. So plan on another cesarean. And I was like, no, I have worked too hard. I know it's safer for me and my baby to do a VBAC. I knew all the things by then. So that's when I reached out to a home birth midwife, and I got a doula. And that baby was born at home in the water. I had a week of prodromal labor. My labors are never textbook. So my contractions were always about 6 minutes apart, the whole labor, about 6 minutes apart. I slept for 45 minutes right before transition, and had 3 contractions. You do that in the hospital, and they're like, what's going on? And you're stalling, and let's talk about Pitocin, right? So all of these things that I knew for a fact for myself, had I been in that hospital, I would have ended up with another cesarean birth. But yet I had my baby unmedicated at home in the water, and he was actually born in the call as well. But that birth was life-changing, because I will tell you the significance of having people in your birth space that love you and support you and trust the process, and how much it makes all the difference in the world. To have somebody in your space saying, you're fine, you're doing great, keep breathing, you're safe, I'm here if you need me, versus, I don't know if this is, doing well, and let's monitor this, and all of the unsupportive advice that comes at you. I also had a really spiritual experience with that third baby, and I've shared about this many times, but it's part of my story and part of why I'm so passionate about what I do. So once I was complete, right, I think I was 9.5 centimeters with a little lip of cervix. So I was like, I want to get in the birth tub. That's been my goal this whole time. And it is wonderful, ladies. If you are listening, birth in a birth tub, if you can, or get into some kind of water, it's beautiful. So I get into the birth tub, 4.5 hours later, and I always joke, if you're listening, this is not going to be you. This was me and my mental space. And I am using, every time I feel a contraction that's pushing, and I've never had this before because I've always had an epidural, and I'm like, wow, that's kind of uncomfortable. So I'm taking these big breaths, and I'm quote unquote pushing, and you can hear me breathing through my nose. I'm like, and my husband's looking at me, and he kind of jokes I can hear you breathing through your nose. I'm like, yeah, it hurts, I'm not ready to do that just yet. So anyways, but I do reach this point where I'm like, I am exhausted, and I'm a little scared that I'm not going to be able to finish this. And so I tell my husband, I'm like, go upstairs, make the bed. I'm going to get out of the water. We're going to use gravity. I'm ready to be uncomfortable, because in my head, I had to work through what was going to happen if I didn't have this baby soon. And that meant we might have to call an ambulance. People are going to be in my house that I don't know. All the lights are going to be on. When I get to the hospital, they're going to, have their opinions about what I just came from, birthing at home. Like I had to walk myself through that and think that is less comfortable than trying to get out and birth this baby on the bed. So let's get out. So my husband goes up, makes the bed, puts the like clear stuff on it, the like sheet down so that we're not getting all the juices everywhere. And he comes back down. And meanwhile, and I think this is so funny because I always say, like, I am a spiritual woman. I'm a woman of prayer. I hadn't prayed or said anything during this entire time. But when my husband went upstairs, I had this like brief moment of like a desperate prayer of like, Heavenly Father, I cannot do this and I'm really scared. And so my husband comes down and he's like, okay, it's ready. And he goes to like forklift me out of the birth pool. And I said, no, it's happening. And 2 pushes later, my baby was out. And it was the most spiritual experience of my entire life. I felt closer to Christ than I ever have. I remember thinking afterwards that I'm like, I think that's like, giving birth, I can only imagine, is as close as you can ever come to understanding even a portion of maybe what he suffered. It just became this like I could not, there was nothing in me that could have done that by myself, but yet he was there and it was instant. And so anyways, it was this incredible spiritual experience all around. The support that I had from both sides of the veil kind of thing. And believing in myself. And even though it was the hardest thing I had ever done, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever done. And so it was shortly after that when I'm like, I look at what the medical system, odds stacked against me, looked like, and it shouldn't have turned out that way. And it wouldn't have turned out that way had I not done this with people that were loving and supportive and believed in the natural process of birth. And so that's when I was like, I have to help other women understand that if I can do this, anybody can. And so my husband's been really supportive all along the way, but that's where that decision came from. I mean, we used all of our tax return to have that baby at home. And then we used the next tax return to take me out of state to be able to train to become a birth educator. Like it was that much of a passion. And my husband was really involved with that too. So that's my long backstory of why I do what I do today.
No, I love it. And I think you need the whole why to really know why it's so important to you. And it shows. I'm sure there have been times when it was not easy. Like you said, I think people sometimes see this side of your story where it's like 10,000 followers on Instagram. And I'm sure your courses are doing well. And, I think you don't go back to that time when, you took your whole tax return to invest in something that you didn't know where it was going to go and invested in yourself. And I think just like you said with your birth story, having your husband be so supportive, even on that front, and like, okay, why do you want to do this? And this is our whole tax return. I'm sure there are other things that you could have done with that. But I love that piece of your story that you invested in yourself when it wasn't easy to then go on. And I mean, can't even probably count how many women that you've helped moving forward. So what a cool seed to sow over what year was that when you decided to go to birth education school?
So that would have been 2014. Like
wow.
2014.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
When you say it like that, geez, that was a long time ago. Huh? Crazy.
that's so cool. I think you hear like these overnight success stories seemingly, and none of them truly are. When you think that's a 10-year seed that's been sown and multiplied, that's incredible. I love that.
Yeah.
And then when did you decide to be a doula after becoming a birth educator? Or was that all wrapped up in the same school?
It wasn't on purpose. You were certified as a doula during that education. But remember, at this time, I had a 1-year-old, a 1, a 3, and 5-year-old. And my husband was working part-time and going to school full-time. So I was really on my own in the way of taking care of things around the house. So it was never my intention. Like one of the benefits of being a birth educator, that was a way I could help and also have people in my home. I didn't have to leave my home to be able to do that. And I would nurse my babies, or my babies would be running in and out if I needed them to, while I educated. But along that path of like learning about birth, and it was recommended that you attend a birth at least twice a year. And so I like put it out there and I'm like, well, I'll just check this out. And that first birth, I was hooked. I was like, first of all, I need more training because birth education and what you do to physically support a woman are different. And so that's the benefit of like the birth course that I created now. I'm like, I have both sides. I can train dad to be the doula. I can talk to mom about what it's like to have an extra doula in there. And then we all have the birth education. Like there's so much more than what I knew when I was getting started. But that first birth, and I was like, I need more education and I'm hooked. I thought I was going to know how to support her and I didn't. Like, I really thought intuitively, like, I know my body, I know exactly what I need, and I did not have, I believe I was very helpful for her. I think she was a great first birth for me and for her. It worked out wonderfully, but yeah, it was like, this is the coolest thing ever. This is the sacred space that I want to be a part of.
That's so beautiful. Where does somebody start that maybe wants to go down the birth education route? Is there like a certain organization that you suggest, or you just Google, birth education near me, or how do you suggest to start?
Yeah, it's a personal thing. So, right, because there's like hypnobirthing and hypnobabies and Bradley method, and there's all these different things. So, I really think it's a matter of you, if you haven't done one of those methods for yourself yet, looking into what's out there. There's also just like where you can like certify to be a birth educator and it's not attached to a method. So there's different routes that you can take, but it just depends on what is going to sound right for you. And even where I started was right for me at the time, and then when it wasn't right, it was time to switch it up. It was the same with the doula training. I took a doula training, I chose not to certify, and I had reasons for that. But any education that you can get, I think just starting right where you're at. Start where you're at. If it's you can't afford those things, you're not ready to jump into that yet, then grab some books. Like, read some books about birth. Read The Birth Partner. Read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. Get yourself educated on those background things. Evidence-based birth is like an excellent place to go when you're looking for information on. They just came out with a new water birth study, or they're talking about, like, anytime you want to talk about due dates, changing of due dates, or ultrasound, or there's so much information and education out there. It's not just about having a class full of people that you're talking to about the labor process. It's really helping them get through the education of it so that they know their options. That's kind of my big thing, is informed consent. Like, you have to know what you're up against so that you have a voice. Otherwise, you're going to be at the mercy of your provider, which, if you have an excellent provider that really does match with you in every single way, which is rare, then you're good. But if not, are you going to know what you're willing to push back on or what you really want for your birth?
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, I'm a PA by background, and I feel like I didn't truly understand informed consent until listening through your podcast. So I highly
Hmm.
recommend, just even come from a medical background to truly understand, what you're consenting to. That's so
Yeah.
cool. And
Yeah.
so you said originally when you were doing birth education, you had your babies in and out. So did you start doing like one-on-one on a Zoom or that kind of thing, and then move into the classroom, or how did your process work at the beginning?
I immediately went to the classroom. In fact,
Okay.
it's the thing that is not my favorite about what I do now. Like, the digital courses are great. They're ready for women any time of day, and they're available all around the world. That's wonderful. But it doesn't give me as much one-on-one time with talking with people face to face. So that's the part that is not my favorite about the digital. And it's what I absolutely loved about having in-person classes. Yes, I'm still available on the Facebook group and stuff for questions and things like that, but it's just not the same. So if you can teach them in your house, I think it's a wonderful way to do it. Also, if you're looking to do doula work and you want to pair those together, then it makes sense to do it from your home. That is where 95% of my clients came from. And then once the ball's rolling, then they pass it to their friends and to their friends and to their friends. But yeah, my kids were running in and out, and I was nursing while there were people there. And I think they actually liked that. It made it more real, that like, and this is what's coming for you. And it was exciting and fun. And I loved it. They loved it. It was awesome.
That's so cool. And I love that you can pursue your dream as a mom. I think sometimes people see it has to be either or. And I love that your story
Yeah.
is there's both, and you just figure it out and you make adjustments and sacrifice where you need to. But there's the ability to still pursue a dream that you have, even if it seems like, oh, it just doesn't align or make sense, or it's not logical right now, which is, I think that's so powerful. So you talked about then people passing on to their friend and their friend and their friend. When did you decide to pivot over to do the podcast and then the birth course?
Okay, so that happened because I had decided, because things are progressive this way, right? So I'm teaching birth classes and I'm attending birth as a doula, and I'm like, well, obvious next step is to become a midwife, because I'm becoming obsessed with the other side of things. Like, I'm seeing things in a hospital setting, for example, that I can't control. As a doula, I can advocate for you to a point. The only thing I can really say to a provider is like, oh, she mentioned she didn't want that on her birth plan. Like, I'm really not supposed to be advocating at all. So I'm like getting mom and dad on board with things like, hey, this is what he said. This is what it means. What do you want? That kind of stuff. But all the while, like even during this time, so we have 3 boys. The 2 girls are adopted, the 3 boys, and we were trying to get pregnant again. Now, mind you, they were all 2 years apart. We planned them. I mean, first try pregnant, I thought I was going to have no problems. We tried for 4.5 years, and I know how to track ovulation cycles, and I had surgery for endometriosis and all the stuff, right? Couldn't get pregnant. But during that time, I had to step away from hospital births. I was like, I cannot doula at hospital births because I cannot handle the trauma that comes with watching, knowing that what just happened there was not right. She, mom's happy but I see all the background stuff and all the manipulation and all of the things that are really hard to watch sometimes. And I'm like, I cannot have that in my head, because even if I plan to do a home birth and I plan to transfer, like I can't see all the things that are going wrong and like get myself in the right space. So as a doula, I had to step back from that. So, anyways, as I was like not getting pregnant and all of this and doing my birth work and doing my doula work, and I'm like, okay, that next step is midwifery. I have to make a change because of what I'm seeing in these hospital settings. I started at midwifery school and I did a semester of that and I did great and I loved every second of it. But I have little kids and I'm homeschooling and I'm like, I need to be mom. This has a place in my heart. There's a time and place for it, but now is not it. And about halfway through that semester, my business partner, who we're not together on this anymore, but we had started this company together. She reached out to me and she said, hey, what do you think about starting an online course? And probably about 2 weeks prior, I remember looking over the curriculum that I was teaching and thinking, there's so much missing here. And I wish that I could do something about it. And so it was like that thought immediately came back. And my original response was no, like that sounds overwhelming and I don't know what I'm doing and I'm not an expert in all that stuff that goes through your head. But I prayed about it and the next week or whatever, and I had a really strong impression that I needed to do it. And so that's how that started. She approached me and then the first thing we did was decide on a name, right? Like, let's come up with a name. And then things went from there. And it was a grueling process. It's one of those things, it was a beautiful process, obviously, but it's one of those things that you're like, I'm so glad I didn't actually know what this was going to take, because I wouldn't have done it. This was hard. But then you get through it and you're like, okay, like I'm capable. Now I can repeat this process and all of that. But in the beginning, it was not easy. And in fact, we created the birth course. So we followed a course on how to create courses. We created our birth course, which took us a lot longer than we expected, but we had a very specific idea in mind of what we wanted it to look like and the quality we wanted it to have. And we wanted a physical workbook to be able to go along with it. There were a lot of details that we had, even the quality of the video and where we recorded things and what kind of moms we wanted on the videos. Like, it was very specific. And so we did all of that. And all the time here, we were putting everything on credit cards because we didn't have the money for it. And that's not how you build a business. Like, I would not recommend doing it this way. So we went into debt over this and just like credit card. And then we put a bunch of money on the credit card at the end when we were paying for videographers and spaces and clothing and makeup and all of these things that weren't even necessarily necessary, but part of our vision. So once we had that part recorded and we launched it, I think that had like taken us almost a year. And then we launched it in January of 2019. We were like, people are just going to be dying to get this. It's so good. Crickets. Because we didn't do anything on the social media side, on the like even in-person side, that this is up and coming and like, come check us out. Nobody knew who we were, so we launched to crickets, and for 6 months we made like basically nothing. We weren't making enough to cover the fees to keep our website running. Like, we were putting everything on credit cards. So in June of 2019, that's when we started the Pregnancy and Birth Made Easy podcast. And we didn't know what to expect from it. And in fact, our first episode was so bad, and I mean so bad, that no matter how I edited that, we couldn't put it on there. So the first episode that you hear is actually our second episode that we recorded. And it's funny because it's like, if you heard in our first episode, and we're like, there's no first episode. It's so bad. It doesn't exist. But so that, and they're rough when you listen to them in the beginning. The audio is bad. We don't know what we're doing. Really, really nervous and shy on camera, or on audio even. Just we're like, so stick straight. It was awful. But we got a little more comfortable over time, and it kind of moved forward from there. So that was June. By August, we had maxed out all of our credit cards. And we're at the point where now we were going to have to be taking money from our families, each of us, our family
Mm.
accounts, just to be able to pay the monthly fee on the credit cards. And that is where I was talking to my husband, and I had a heart to heart with God. And I was like, I can't do this to my family. Like, if this isn't going to work out, I need to know if I need to be done with this and we just work to pay off the debt, because this isn't working for our family. And
Mhm.
sometimes when I receive personal revelation, I get it in dreams. I ended up having a dream, and like 3 a.m. woke me up in the middle of the night, and I started writing it all down. And it wasn't anything that like life changing if I were to like tell you all about it here, but it was very clear that that I was to keep going down the path, and that I would hit a point, it would take off, and we would be okay. And even though there were these scary, scary things in the dream that were like, don't do it, don't, it was like, but there was a clear path forward. And so I said, okay, and decided to stick with it. I was even having that conversation with my business partner. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do here. Stuck with it. And after I had that dream, August was the very first month that we made enough sales just to pay the credit card. And every month past that, we never ever had to use the credit card again. And so it took us about a year to pay off all of the debt. It wasn't like this fast thing by any means. And that was before we were, we waited till we paid off the debt to upgrade our computers, to buy a cell phone that had a good camera, like, audio equipment. Like, we waited until we were completely paid off about a year later. And then things continued to grow, obviously. And it was such a great thing, but it was not an easy start by any means. And even
Mm.
now, any kind of business is going to have its ups and downs. And every month I find myself anxious, like, is this going to be the month that it's all going to crash? It feels unreal a lot of the time. Um, and, economy and like 2020 ended up being great for us because people went online, and that was really wonderful. 2021 wasn't as great. People were able to go back to birth classes in person, and 2022 was a little better, and 2023 has started really slow. Like, you just never know, and that's kind of the way of business. And I am not, I'll be honest with you, like, I am not good at like social media and stuff. Like, yes, 10,000 on Instagram. Guys, that is 10,000 since 2019. It's not like I
Mhm.
blew up overnight. I have been consistent. And I don't even like social media. Like, you don't see my face on there a lot because it takes a lot for me to like put the camera towards me and like be spunky and feel like I'm being like real, and not fake. It takes a lot for me to like want that to come through because I don't ever want to come off fake. So there's a lot of like background business stuff that I'm like, I wish I didn't know any of this. Like, I don't care about analytics and all this stuff. Like, I just want to talk to people about birth. So business is just kind of, it's one of those things. But that is the story of my essential birth and how and where it is today.
That's so cool. I feel like there's so much in there. We've talked about on here before, the entrepreneur roller coaster, and it's that same thing of like there will be highs and lows, and you're not alone. But I love what you said about, you're not even a social media girl, but you are consistent. And I think no matter what you're pursuing, venture, business, otherwise, just showing up consistently, it's like that slide edge compound effect mentality. If you just keep showing up, like you said, good things will happen. But like also you said, I'm with you on the faith journey and receiving, just confirmation that you're in the right direction. But sometimes you have to
Yeah.
stop and be like, okay, at what point am I willing to have that line in the sand that's like, I'm not willing to continue to snowball this debt? And so that's humbling too. And who knows if you hadn't have had that dream, where we'd all be now. So I'm glad that you leaned into it. But it's so good to hear it wasn't always easy, and there were hard decisions to be made, and partnerships are changing, and your husband was involved, and your family. And it's such a special story. And I'm really glad that you decided to stick with it. It's so
Thank
good.
you.
You're welcome. Anything looking back that you're surprised? I know you said a little bit about your partnership and how that changed, or things that you look back now thinking, and consistency, obviously you mentioned things that were just surprise twists and turns, or connections along the way that you're glad that you made, or just how you grew your network to where we are now.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of right, change comes through being uncomfortable. That's always just where the best change comes from. And so it's, I don't know, even now I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm willing to be uncomfortable. But every time I get into that new spot, I'm like, never mind. I don't want to do this. But yeah, I think especially like having a business partner early on, like you think everything is going to be great and it's always going to be this way. And it's not like her and I had like some big falling out or whatever, and we still talk and it's wonderful. But you just think it's always going to be this way. Like I remember so it was hard enough to like get the podcast going, right? Things I would have done differently. Let me back up. Things I would have done differently. And I think these will be like really important things for your listeners to hear. If you are planning to do any kind of birth course or selling of yourself or selling of a product, your number one job up front is to have people know who you are. So if you're going to birth centers, if you're reaching out to local doulas, like whatever it is, if you social media account, TikTok, whatever you're doing, you have to create an audience. The second thing that I would do is I would have an email list. That audience needs to have somewhere to go, some way to connect to you. And you may have heard this before, but like you don't own your social media. You don't own your Facebook page. You don't own your TikTok account. Like those things can be shut down at any time for any reason, and you have no way to contact those followers. Your email list you own forever. So you get a provider to where you can get somebody on an email list, and you do that. Like you've seen my free 3 exercises. I can even include that link for you if you'd like, so that people can see what that looks like. But you give them away, like here's an awesome freebie. It's going to give you a ton of really great content, totally free. And it gets you on an email list, because now we can communicate. Now we can have a conversation. The next thing you do is you make sure that you're in touch with those people every week. So the podcast was our way of doing that. So now we're building an email list, and now we're going to be able to talk to them every week. So the podcast gives me an opportunity to talk to you every week. And then if you're on my email list, I'm going to send you the links for the podcast, things that we talked about. I'm going to be in touch with you every week, and we're going to build that connection. So that's all the like back end stuff that should have been happening before we ever launched a podcast. Okay. So when we started the podcast and it was super uncomfortable, the other thing that we did was we recorded all of our content before we had ever done anything like a podcast. So one of the pieces of feedback that we got when I was doing course updates, which are going to be live in just a little bit, one of the pieces of feedback we got was, you seem really like just, I don't know, like not a lot of expression and stuff, not a lot of energy or personality in the videos. And I'm like, yeah, it's because we had never done it before. And it was the most uncomfortable thing I'd ever done in my life. Like we're reading off of a teleprompter. We've got a camera in our face. I'm sweating because I am like so nervous in front of the camera. It was awful. So then we start podcasting and we see we're really not good at that either. But at least it's a conversation. At least there's 2 of us. At least we're joking and talking about birth. It was actually my favorite. I'm like, if I could repeat this and recreate it, this is all I want. But then when it was time for us to split, she wanted to focus more on her family and stuff. I wanted to continue with the business. And I had to do my first solo podcast. That was the worst experience of my life. I was like, I have nobody to talk to. I mean, we're used to making jokes and stuff. I'm like, I can't be funny by myself. Like, I don't know what to do. And then on top of it, by that time we had moved into a studio. So instead of just doing it, at home and there's no camera, now we've got a camera and we've got several production guys, and we've got audio and all this stuff. And I had to animate and have some personality because it's not just me. It was really rough. So those were some things that I didn't know were going to happen. And I didn't know that they would be so hard. Solo podcasting was so hard for me in the beginning. I feel like I do an okay job of it now. I still have a lot to learn, but but it was really awkward. And so that's where you hear from that transition from having her there. We only had like 3 podcasts in the bank at that time. So I was like scrambling. And so there's a couple podcasts where my husband was on, like several in a row. And I'm like, today you get to hear from Michael, because I'm like so panicked about how to have a conversation by myself, So that was funny. Along the way, I have met incredible people. I feel like networking is probably one of my greatest skills. Like when I don't know if you've heard of Michael Hyatt. Hyatt has this book, and it is something that I've actually read with the 2 girls that work for me now, which that was another thing that I wasn't expecting, because I'm like, oh, how do I hire? How do I tell people I don't want them working for me because it's not going well? Like that was uncomfortable. How do you find the right people? All of these like growth things, right? But anyways, he talks about your freedom compass. And within that, he's got like 4 places. Basically, you should only be really doing the things that you're good at and light you up. but we spend time doing things that we're not good at that make us excited, or that we are good at that we shouldn't be doing because we have no business doing it. It takes away from the rest of our business. So we end up in all of these things, or we find ourselves doing stuff in what he calls our drudgery zone, which I was doing a lot of. I'm like, I don't want to, go through all these emails and whatever else. And so networking and so like social networking is like kind of my thing. And so when I had made a lot of connections even prior to creating the birth course, and that was such a benefit because then it was like I had conversations that could be had. You've seen the professionals within the birth course that were willing to, IBCLCs that were willing to give us content or come and record with us. I connected with other moms all over. So yeah, the social networking piece I think is really big. That's what I wish I would take more time to do today. So I've just recently started to like, okay, I'm going to go to some conferences and things like that, because that is where my passion is like people and talking with people. So yeah, those kinds of things, those connections were good, but things are always changing. Things are always changing and there's always going to be a challenge. And I think that's just part of life and business.
Yeah, no, I love that about conferences and just giving ideas. I have a mentor that we were just chatting over the weekend, and he was like, the one thing that you can continue to do is always be growing your network. Successful entrepreneurs have a huge network that's constantly growing. It's never too big. And I agree with you on that. People are always going to be giving birth, but if people don't know about My Essential Birth, they're not going to be able to find you. And I love just your conferences will be able to just multiply that. And it does become sort of a exponential effect where you have multiplication instead of addition. But I love kind of that discomfort of growth with, you never think about having employees and what does that look like? And now you're in crucial conversations with people. And it's cool to see the progression from your birth story to where we are today and kind of all the ins and outs. That some of it we get to hear on the podcast every week and see in your emails, and some of it is stuff that's behind the scenes that I really appreciate you just being open to share, because it's the things that we don't see, like you said, on social media, because it, maybe feels a little inauthentic to bring it forward. But I think that's amazing and beautiful. I know we're winding down on time. Anything that you want to share otherwise about people that maybe, I know you've shared a ton about people that have a dream. Obviously, if you're pregnant, thinking about getting pregnant, want to support anyone that's pregnant, I cannot recommend the podcast enough. And the 3 free exercises is where I started on my journey. And Stephanie and Courtney too were a huge piece of our story. So
yeah, I would love to just tell everybody listening that you know more than you think you do, and somebody needs to hear what you have to offer. So even though you feel like you're constantly an imposter, that you're not the right person for the job, you're wrong. And there's a great deal, I'm getting emotional over it because it's so true. There's a great deal of women out there, possibly men, depending on what you're doing, that need you. Like they need you to stand up and be uncomfortable so that they can get what they need. So you have an immense amount of people to bless. And so if you're feeling nervous about it, start anywhere. Be uncomfortable, start anywhere, and see where the process takes you. You will have guidance along the way, whether you want to call it spiritual or God or family or friends around you. You will have guidance along the way. You will be uplifted in the ways that you need to be. So trust the process. As far as where you can find me, so it's myessentialbirth.com if you're interested in the birth or postpartum course, or if you want to download those 3 free exercises. I'll also include all the links for you, Ashley, to give to them. And then if you want to follow me on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, I'm most active on Instagram. It's at myessentialbirth. And then obviously, if you haven't yet, you can tune into the Pregnancy and Birth Made Easy podcast. And that's available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. Yeah, I cannot encourage it enough. I plan to go back and binge again once we get pregnant again. So I can't thank you enough for being here, Stephanie. It's such a gift to have you here. Like I said, we've spent tons of hours together in the car, in the earbuds, all the things, but it's so great to have you here. And again, just thank you for your time and appreciate all that you're doing for women in birth to truly feel informed about what they're doing and to have their dream birth story, whatever that looks like along the way. So I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having me here.
Okay, friend, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Feel free to share this podcast with another friend who it may inspire. Leave a review to possibly be featured at the beginning of another episode, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the stories that can help unlock your dream for you.